Echo TV is a co-production of Minnesota's Emergency, Community, and Health Outreach Collaborative of Health, Safety, Emergency Preparedness, Ethnic and Nonprofit Agencies, and TPT's Minnesota channel.
Hello and welcome to Echo. I'm your host, Calvin Worthen. Echo is the Emergency Community Health Outreach. We provide educational and emergency preparedness programs in multiple languages, serving African, Southeast Asian, Hispanic communities. As always, we'll begin our show with a story, Recovering from the Storm. Watch this.
Trees ripped from their roots. Power lines knocked down. People's homes so badly damaged they weren't safe to live in. This was what residents of North Minneapolis had to deal with after a tornado ripped through their city in the spring of 2011. 2 lives lost and millions of dollars worth of damage. A traumatic event like this one can be hard to recover from. You might feel stress, worry, and fear as you deal with your loss and putting your life back together. You can feel like this even if you didn't have losses of your own. These are natural, emotional responses to the traumatic event. You can recover if you are aware of the symptoms of mental and emotional stress and where you can go for help. You don't have to go through this alone. After a crisis like a tornado, if you or someone you love is feeling anxious, scared, insecure, or worried that it will happen again, call a counselor or healthcare provider for help. Children who are having problems that may be related to recovering from a crisis can receive counseling or mental health supportive services at their school and in the community. Communities are important when it comes to recovering from a crisis. In Minneapolis, people began working together to help their neighbors soon after the storm occurred. Taking care of yourself, your family, and your community is important when dealing with a crisis. We can all grow from the most difficult events. Get to know your neighbors. By having a social network in place, you can help yourself, your family, and your community recover faster. If a crisis has already happened, it's important to show compassion and concern for others. Anything you can do to help ease someone's pain will be a big help to them and your community. Be familiar with what resources are available in your community if there is an emergency. Be open to receiving help and be prepared to volunteer. By helping out either before or during a crisis, you will be helping everyone who is impacted by the emergency. It can also help you and your family feel better and more hopeful. Before a crisis happens, we can help our chances of successfully dealing with it by making ourselves as healthy as possible. We can also learn from how we handled difficult situations in the past. That can help us get through our current problems. You and your family can be ready by taking responsibility for your health and safety. Develop an emergency safety plan with your family that includes where you will meet if you're separated, and the names and numbers of contact people who can help. Make sure you are in good physical and mental condition by eating and sleeping well, being active, not smoking or abusing drugs or alcohol, and learning how to manage stress. In North Minneapolis, people are still dealing with the aftereffects of the tornado, but they are making progress by helping each other and by seeking help for themselves. No matter what, when, or how the crisis occurs, we know we can recover. It takes time, but we can do it by being prepared, working together, and taking care of ourselves and our families.
Welcome back to Echo. To our viewers, we'd like to say what we'll be talking about may bring back some emotions, difficult emotions that you may have to deal with, but the goal of this program is to lead viewers to resources so that they can work through emotions, rebuild community resiliency so our communities can be stronger in case there is another difficulty or disaster. I want to introduce our guest today to our ECHO show, Dr. Lolita King, the senior clinical psychologist at North Point Health and Wellness Center, and our tornado survivor, Miss Patricia Collins. How are you today?
Good,
Hi.
thank you.
Let's get started with that day, those events, that event that happened. What happened with you? What was going on that day from your perspective?
I had just gotten out of church and we was on our way home. And all of a sudden it got pitch black and just real quiet.
So you're driving?
Yes, down 26, yes. And all of a sudden the wind just got real strong, started rooting trees and everything. So we tried to get to the safest place to, go to safety.
And you kept driving through the storm.
Well, no, we didn't drive through the storm. We seen the storm in front of us, and we turned around.
Oh, wow.
Yes, it was devastating because there was no warning.
Yeah.
So.
What are some of the other emotions that you kind of feel when this comes up? When I ask you about this, what are you feeling?
It feels, I don't know, I feel sad, I feel really just lost because you didn't expect, you didn't have no warning.
Oh, man.
So
So
that was
lost,
real.
and was it fear involved? Did you get?
Of course, I thought we was
lots of
gonna
fear?
die.
Were you by yourself?
No, I wasn't. It was my family. I heard screaming, glass breaking, trees rooting, and it was just devastating.
So, in addition to addressing your emotions, what else was challenging about getting yourself back to the routine, getting back into what we see today as Patricia?
Well, I think for me is, going to therapy. It's one thing, me and my kids, grandkids. And
So now everybody's in therapy in a sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So, and because you're working over some other challenges.
Right,
Like
exactly.
what? Give me some examples.
Like depression,
Okay.
just being afraid.
And you physically were uprooted, and you had to be.
Yes.
You couldn't be where you were. So
I had to
There was
move.
there's some other challenges of getting back to normal, getting your
Yes.
children to school, getting to work, and all things like that. But you also are relocated.
Yes, I did.
Tell me more about that.
Well, the house we was living in, actually, it was really damaged because it had leaks in the roof where the water was running to the light fixture, which caused a fire hazard, electrical fire hazard. So I was blessed enough to find a place, with me and my grandkids. So God
I know
is
that these
good.
are very common emotions and feelings that someone has going through trauma. Doctor, what are some of the signs and symptoms of feelings after a storm, after a disaster?
Well, Patricia mentioned some of them, and they do include fearfulness, anger, irritability, difficulty sleeping, reliving the trauma event.
So what about getting back into the routine? Is that an issue as well?
Yes,
Like
that
to-
can be very difficult.
Okay, so going back to work or getting the kids back to school.
Sure.
Okay. Oh, wow. So let me just ask, how does our community handle trauma like this? How does our community handle crisis?
Well, I think we have a very resilient community. I think what people tend to do is go to their family and friends first, and then reach out to other organizations and community-related.
That's good. That's good. I think also you might want to. I think we are resilient, but we're also very reluctant in some instances that we don't want to admit that we've been as hurt as we were. Emotional pain and emotional trauma is not always recognized in the Black community as some necessity to go to the doctor for. Am I right?
Absolutely.
So there's reluctancy in even coming in to see you, and the clinical psychologist, as a clinical psychologist, very reluctant.
Yeah, there's a stigma against seeking out mental health for the most part in the community.
Wow. So how are the children doing?
They're doing pretty well right now. I don't think that they was realizing how serious it was, at the time. But when the glass and everything screaming, howling, you know, devastated.
So, Dr. King, what should a parent look for in a child who's experienced this kind of disaster? What are parents looking for to see if they've been affected, if the child's been affected?
Well, you would be looking for any new acting out behaviors or extreme acting out behaviors. You look for being clingy or withdrawn. You would also pay attention to increase in crying, sleep problems. For younger children, it may be toileting issues that come up.
Wow, wow. What about the reliving of this event? Is that an issue?
It can be,
Like,
yes.
are your children afraid of the next storm coming?
Always. Always. They afraid when it rains, you know, or lightning or anything, they're devastated.
And so for the rest of the summer, they
Yes.
had to deal with
Yes.
this idea that this could happen again.
Yes.
Okay.
They was terrified.
What about monitoring their media? What does the media have to do with, if a child is going through crisis, what does media have to do with it?
Well, that could actually heighten the fearfulness in a child, so I would suggest that you monitor the exposure to crisis situations, the media, and things like that.
So cartoons that have violence and crisis and
Sure,
maybe news programs, all
Sure.
sorts of things. That's really important. What can we do to help a child who's struggling?
Well, you can, like I said, monitor what they watch on television, listen to their concerns and worries, give them extra hugs and support, let them know that they're safe now.
That's important.
And yes,
Yeah.
and seek out mental health services if it's warranted.
Okay. And are there any particulars that you want to give out to our viewers and our guests that we look for to say that right there needs to be something we should seek out some professional help for?
Sure, poor appetite, like I said, clinginess, or being withdrawn, toileting issues. So those sorts of things, where you know the child is just not themselves.
Okay. All right. So what can people do to prepare their families a little bit better for such a crisis like this?
Well, you want to make a family emergency plan where you have ways to communicate in case of an emergency and the emergency contact numbers.
I like that. A family emergency plan, like a FIP.
Sure.
You make a FIP.
Yes.
And this thing communicates what exactly?
It communicates to them, actually prepares you for the next crisis or disaster should it come, and it takes away the chaos of the moment. If
And it
you
would
have
include phone numbers?
Where you'll meet, if
a
in
meeting
case of a
spot, okay,
crisis, a
okay.
meeting spot.
And what about if the children were in school, or if mom or dad was at work? What else would it include for giving out those directions?
You would want to know what your work emergency plan is, and also the school's emergency plan.
So
And-
parents should know what the emergency plan is at school,
Sure.
and the children should know what the emergency plan is at work,
Yes.
so that everybody's communicating. If there's something that is involving that community and everybody's not at home,
Right.
then this should also be addressed in the
Sure.
FIP.
And you also should create a emergency preparedness kit. That could include things like a flashlight, water, tartar resistant or water resistant.
Any food, canned
Food,
goods,
yes.
dry goods.
Yeah, have your important documents in that case
Yes,
that I was talking
yes,
about.
that's very important.
Yes,
Yeah.
because a lot of people lost their Social Security cards, birth certificates, and things of that nature. But if they put it in something that is tartar resistant and water resistant, and have that somewhere you can easily catch, that would be a good idea.
Is that what happened to you, Patricia? Did you lose a lot of important documents? And
I didn't lose a lot of important documents, but I was living in life-threatening situation as far as fire hazard and different things, you know.
what about memorabilia? I know that this was one of the major things. My grandmother was in the line of the storm as well. And so just getting back over to her place and finding out that there were things lost and things missing because she was keeping things in her attic, and the roof was exposed, and there was some loss of some memorabilia. Was that the same for you?
No, it didn't damage me like that. You know, I was lucky. But, you know, I think it was mentally and emotionally more than anything.
Okay. So what do you think we can do? What can we talk about to prepare the community? Like my neighbors, the teachers, anybody. Like what can we do to prepare the community for another crisis?
Well, you want to encourage your family, friends, and community to make a emergency preparedness plan, and
that would
work
include like my church. That would include
Yes,
like my
sure.
school. Everybody kind of has one that is, you know, interconnected maybe.
Sure. Monitor local weather stations for sudden bulletins, and encourage your family and friends to get to know their neighbors.
That's very important. Getting to know your neighbors. Did you get a chance to get to know your neighbors before this event?
Yes, I did.
And so you already knew when you came in, you could knock on a neighbor's door if you needed something. And
Yes, well, yeah, I had a few people that I can go to.
did anybody come to you?
Oh, no.
Okay.
You know, like I say, one important thing is that the tornado was already here before we was warned. You know, I was in the midst
Yeah.
already before the sirens went off.
Yeah, and so when there's technical difficulty like that, in a sense, we have to be prepared more or less so that we know. We can look in the sky and we can tell, we can turn on our car radio if we're in our car, just to be aware of upcoming weather, hazardous situations, and crises. That's very important. I think so, at least. And so having a preparedness plan, are there like churches in your community, or are there
Yes.
other organizations? So have you decided to maybe outreach to them and to see
Of course, my church and a lot of other churches has been wonderful
Okay.
as far as helping the community and everything. They had the Salvation Army out, giving out food and water every day. You know, it's been, I mean, it's just wonderful how people came together.
So what about during an emergency situation? Like, what can we do while something's happening? I know that with constant practice of your family emergency plan, you could put in what kind of things so that in the middle of it, there's no hesitation. Everybody in the family knows what to do next.
Well, they can contact ECHO, the Red Cross, community social service agencies such as North Point, and county health and human services departments.
Wow, so not necessarily just running and calling family, but being able to connect with some people who could give some information, especially immediately after a storm or a crisis situation, a disaster. ECHO would be available, and all sorts of community organizations, those numbers you mentioned, would be available so that once this thing is through, then we can go ahead and get some information about how we get ourselves fixed up. I think that's good. Now, where can people go if they're having trouble coping right now?
Well, most people rely on, like I said, family and friends. You can also go to your clergy, your church, the mosque, your doctor, the school counselor, if necessary, and your local community mental health providers.
Have you seen an increase in visitation from the people of our community? Have you seen an increase of blacks coming to the clinic for this?
Yes. There has been some of them are already being seen for other issues, and then that just kind of exacerbated everything.
Oh, wow. So this was something, you know, icing on the cake in a sense on some other issues that our community was dealing with that would be, you know, considered traumatic in the norm for us. And then this event hits. And how many people do you think still remain resilient? When you're talking to patients, are you sensing that there is a breaking point, or are you sensing that there is still resilience, there's still hope?
There's still hope and resiliency in the community. I truly believe that.
Okay, outside of North Point, are there any other clinical psychologists who would be able to cater to African Americans?
Absolutely.
Okay.
There's a number of them in the community.
Okay. You know of any? Can you give me I know that there was a chiropractor on Broadway, and I know that usually is helpful for relieving stress. You know of any other doctors that might be able to cater to the needs of the community?
Sure. There's a directory of psychologists and other mental health professionals. There's the mental health clinic. There are community organizations. So there's a number of resources that they can contact.
And churches probably pastors or would be willing to do some counseling,
some
and
counseling,
some
sure.
therapy. Is that where you went for?
Yeah, well, yes, I do counseling with the pastor also, but I have a professional therapist at North Point.
Okay.
Yes, I do. I go to once a week.
So is it beneficial to get both that spiritual aspect and a very clinical aspect to understanding the trauma? So where are you standing now in your mind and your spirit about this thing? Are you still asking questions like why?
Well, I guess not so much why. It's just that I never want to live that again, because I didn't really know what was going on. It was already there, I thought it was the end of the world. So it was very devastating, very emotional. So I try not to think about it a whole lot, to move on to healing process.
Get the healing in your mind.
Yes.
That's good. That's very good, because that's what's necessary.
Yes.
And that's what we're here talking about. We're talking about ways of getting healing to the viewers and our people. So I think this is very beneficial. I think it really is. I like the idea of the resiliency and how we are still considering ourselves very resilient in a community that has been downridden with economic issues and educational issues, and now this storm hits. And then there are plenty of people who don't have the resources to get themselves together, like insurance on their homes and things like that. Were you prepared in those manners?
No, but I always remember that you always can call for help, also, which is a good resource because they have everything, that you don't know about. They give you information about other resources that you're not aware of.
So you weren't misplaced from your home for a long time?
No, I wasn't. I wasn't misplaced from my home at all.
Okay.
It was just staying there with the electrical fire hazard.
Well,
And damage.
I want to thank my guests today, Dr. Lolita King and Ms. Patricia Collins. And, just to make sure we get you right to the point, I want to get you some 4 key messages that we want to communicate out. Is know the signs and symptoms of post-crisis mental health problems. The second one is to know that it's natural to have trouble with coping after a crisis. There is help available. Thirdly, get to know your neighbors so you can work together to recover from a crisis. And lastly, prepare yourself, your family, and your community before a crisis hits. Thank you so much for viewing us here at ECHO. I want to thank my guests. Thank you for joining us. And for more information, if you're interested, echominnesota.org. Thank you again.
Echo TV is a co-production of Minnesota's Emergency, Community, and Health Outreach Collaborative of Health, Safety, Emergency Preparedness, Ethnic and Nonprofit Agencies, and TPT's Minnesota Channel.